This Vaal Fireball Pathfinder is a quintessential junk build in that it is poison, it is a spellcaster, it is return projectiles, it is shotgunning, and I really need to hump the boss to do any damage at all. It uses a lot of different interactions to make this build come together, but there's three main challenges and interactions that I want to highlight first and foremost. First, it's to do with Vaal skill uptime. Second, it's to do with Fireball's unique shotgunning mechanic. And thirdly, I want to talk about Fireball's interaction with poison on this build. So this build is enabled primarily by the new dagger enchant introduced this league in King's March, allowing socketed Vaal skill gems within your dagger to have 100% soul gain prevention. This means you can immediately start generating souls right after casting, which allows us to use Soul Ripper, the primary battery for Vaal skill generation on this build, immediately after using my Vaal skill. I'm also using Master Alchemist, a set of forbidden jewels, to allow me for a 50% chance to cast for free, which is basically just a 50% more damage multiplier. Because of the dagger enchant though, this means I don't need to run things like Soul Ripper or Triumvirate Authority or rely on duration scaling to allow me to use my Vaal skills relatively freely. Secondly, as far as shotgunning goes, Vaal Fireball is very specific. So while most shotgunning mechanics have basically been removed and the ones that are still remaining have very much to do with overlaps rather than true shotgunning, Vaal Fireball, sort of like Eye of Winter, fires projectiles from you asynchronously. They fire out at different times, and because the projectiles come out of you from different times, they can actually all shotgun on the enemy. Now, it's kind of hard to do, and you really want to be inside of the boss for your outgoing projectiles. However, even when you are entirely inside the boss, those projectiles when they're outgoing can ghost. They can miss entirely. However, when I do use an active Hydrosphere, for some reason, this disables that kind of ghosting behavior, which can occur sometimes, which is really nice. In other words, you have 32 outgoing projectiles. Those projectiles can sometimes fork, creating more projectiles, and then all those projectiles can return. I've estimated 50 projectiles per cast in POB, but according to my testing, it's usually around the 60 to 70-ish range as far as number of projectiles I can hit per cast when using Vaal Fireball with return projectiles. Lastly, this build uses the new Vine Spike Cordial Anoint. Now, it's probably possible to play this as hit base, but because of the natural synergy as a Pathfinder, I believe that playing poison on this is really strong. Vine Spike Cordial allows you to apply Grasping Vines when you have a Life Flask active. Now, Pathfinder can have perma Life Flask activity, and Grasping Vines is really good when it's paired with Inextricable Fate, which allows you to poison. In fact, it gives you 100% poison chance, and allows for any damage type to poison when an enemy has more than 3 Grasping Vines. So because Vaal Fireball is already hitting a gajillion times per second, and I have this Vine Spike Cordial Anoint, it becomes very efficient to use Inextricable Fate. However, I'm also able to scale the damage over time multi this patch with the new Perfect Agony. This is really great for getting really high dot multi without having to click a lot of dot multi on the tree, instead relying on crit multi, which I get kind of for free on my weapon with the, I think, Elder suffix. Now, when you're running Perfect Agony, you really want to have high critical strike chance. In fact, you want crit cap. Normally this is quite difficult, however I'm also using the Ungil's Harmony Amulet, which gives you a ton of critical strike chance with no downside because of the amulet's interaction with Perfect Agony rather than critical strike multiplier. Now, while this isn't a particularly cost efficient build, I think it's something that's really fun to play, has a lot of cool interactions, and is still relatively strong and tanky. I'm still playing with that sort of semi-HC restriction, so this character has not died yet. It's T17 viable, it's definitely viable farming all kinds of things, bossing, mapping, and I've really enjoyed it. If you're still interested to learn more, let's talk more about the build right now. Let's get into the POV. So I really want to talk about the items one by one because I think there's a lot to parse through. The weapon itself has the enchant as the most important thing, which I've already covered. But as far as the rest of the craft, I used an Awakener Orb originally. The goal was to Awakener Orb increased crit strikes, which is Shaper Suffix with spell crit chance, with increased crit damage, which is an Elder suffix. But I failed this, and instead I think I used the crit fossils. And just, slam those over and over again, and over and over and over again. Until I think I had one open suffix, and I think I suffix locked and reforged crit, something like that to get that crit multi against enemies that are on full life. There were some different orders. And then after that, I used a suffix lock. So that was a beastcraft that forces suffixes can't be changed. And then I did I think reforge fire, I want to say, on the prefix, get that elemental as extra chaos, but that's sort of just like the cherry on top. Basically, ICS, ICD, and then benchcraft chaos damage is the primary. Because I'm using this as my main links for Vaal Fireball, I also use the Squire. Pretty self-explanatory here, just 3 more sockets. Really, really powerful. I think it well, in my scenario, it gives me a ton more damage, but it at least triples your damage usually. Helmet, place to find res, life, pretty generic here. Not an important piece. Doppelganger, guys, I do want to talk about this. So there's a discussion right now in my head between Doppelganger, Coil, and maybe 4th Vow Zabaqua, as far as Pathfinder goes. So I think 4th Vow setups are okay. Granite Flask scaling can go pretty far, but this build is pretty flask starved because I'm using both Progenesis and Soul Ripper. Coil, I think, is better when you're playing with Dawnbreaker or other sources of elemental shift. And I think Doppelganger is sort of the best standalone. This also pairs really well with Progenesis because that 10% regen per second when you're hit actually pairs really well with, like, Progenesis, Petrified Blood. And I do use Petrified Blood depending on the content that I'm doing. Gloves are another slot that's sort of flexible in a sense for res, but that new benchcraft that you can get from Act 2 in the secret place right before you go up the Vaal Pyramid gives you 60% increased damage, which is really cool. I also get +2 max cold res, which is really good for me because I'm playing Melding Cold. Inextricable Fate is self-explanatory. Ungil's Harmony, really cool amulet, 330% crit chance, which is basically like having, your power charges doubled or something like that. And then it's also giving me my Anoint and a +1 curse. I was using +1 max res, but I realized with flask effect scaling, you don't actually need it. Nimbus, my quintessential ring. I'm allowed to have this on a build. It's like approaching 200 divines, insanely expensive. Good luck. This can't play without this and go return proj, but pretty big damage loss. And then as far as my ring goes, I want to play Recoup because of Progenesis, but otherwise, I think I actually started with a Fractured base, Reforged Chaos, and I actually hit the life naturally, but normally I'd Reforged Chaos until I hit the second resistance, Suffix Lock, and then Reforged Life for the last prefix. Tides of Time, super sick for this build. Also makes your life flasks heal way more. You can see that when I take this off, my life flask recovery actually goes in half, so this is really great for your recovery, and obviously it's good for both Progenesis uptime, Progenesis battery, and for Soul Ripper, which is actually just more damage. I'm running 3 different cluster setups. So one is a 3P Voices, which is fairly cheap this patch. One is an AP Chaos cluster, and the other is also an AP Chaos cluster. It's just because there's a lot of jewels that aren't cluster jewels that I do need to run. As far as those jewels go, I'm using 1 medium. This gives you Spike Concoction, Alchemist Genius, always really great, and Brood for Potency, super sick. Really easy jewel to craft in general. Reforged Speed, I think, guarantees... or maybe it's a 50-50 on Spike Concoction, but yeah, I tend to Reforge Speed to make this thing. But I just bought this one this time. The jewels, the Viridian jewels, these 2 Viridians and the Cobalt are really sick because you can get +2 max cold res this patch. I think the fact that you get +2 max res this patch on rare jewels is insane. So I've managed to, snag a couple of these. These were really cheap. They're 2 or 3 modules. This one's actually a 4 prop, but the Mana of Reservation is actually useless for me. But yeah, those rare jewels, pretty big. I'm running a Grand Spectrum setup, life, mid endurance charges, and LE res. I actually don't really need the LE res because I'm quite overcapped and I could move things around, but I like to stay safely overcapped because I'm farming Eater Altars. Didn't think of many other good sources for endurance charges, but I found that, having that Spectrum was really, really, really good. Especially on a build with relatively low Fizz damage reduction. Now, this Fizz damage reduction is not actually additive with Doppelganger, guys. It is less physical damage taken, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but still quite strong. I've mentioned my Forbidden set already, which gives me more Vaal Soul uses on average, and sometimes you get to use your Vaal skill 5 or 6 times in a row. And then I'm playing Elegant Hubris with Supreme Ostentation. So this jewel is also really cool because it's allowing me to get Power Charge on Critical Strike, and I do need my Power Charge generation. I can also play Peacock as my main links, but it's not very strong to have when you only have 4 Power Charges. Ostentation for this build is sick because it plays with a relatively low strength tree. Dex is fairly useless and Int is also useless, and allows me to tattoo the rest of my build and get my suppression through this. Technically, I'm suppressed cap with Soul Ripper up, but at the start of the map, I actually don't have Soul Ripper for the first couple of seconds, and because I'm playing, HC light, I don't want to take that risk. But Ostentation for this build is very efficient. There are also other things that could be taken, like there's Crit Multi on here. But I think with List Location, there's only 1 free node. So yeah, that's why I've put this here. I think it's a really great thing to have in general. The tattoos I've gone for suppression. I did have 1 single hinder tattoo, which enables this Touch of Cruelty for extra damage. And then there's some chaos damage or reduce curse effect. It just happened to be the tattoos that I already had, but I should probably have tattooed chaos rest to get me capped out there with my Progenesis up. That's that. As far as the Ascendancy goes, the 2 chaos nodes, Nature's, Master Surgeon, pretty self-explanatory for any sort of Vine Spike Cordial build that needs to play perma life flask, right? And then this is really nice to have instead of taking 1, 2. You take 1/2 and then you master or you forbidden this, because Nature's Boon is not very good for this build. It can be good for enabling melding, but I only play 2 magic utility flasks, so that's a bit of a bummer. Doesn't really scale Progenesis, and definitely doesn't scale Soul Ripper any further. Recipe, you know, is sort of self-explanatory. It is what it is. And then as far as the skills go, so because I'm using a Squire setup, I'm able to have my chest completely open. Normally, people like to run auras here, like an Enlightened 4 in your chest, but there actually aren't a lot of auras that I want to fit with this. I could also put in Petrified Blood and run Reservation on the tree, but I'm sort of more comfortable with this setup right now because I was running a lot of Expedition. And when I do Expedition, there's that 20% culling node, and I would prefer not to juggle that with Petrified Blood, just because the monsters can just execute you straight up sometimes if you drop too low. But this setup, this 6-link setup is really nice because it's a build that has relatively low cast speed. So faster casting on my Archibrand is really sweet. I've also mentioned that I need Hydrosphere to create sort of more consistency as far as hits go on bosses for some reason. Don't know why this works even. And then I do have my tracker set up Asmark to spare temp chains, which is enabled by both Whispers of Doom giving me +1 and then Unghost Harmony for my second +1. In the case of only 2 curses, I was playing without temporal chains. I have a casting damage taken tornado setup, not super important I think. I don't even know how well this works with like poison or whatnot, so very confused there. And then Immortal Call is my guard skill of choice, and it's pretty good. Definitely better than Skill Skin for my build, especially because I have a very small life pool. Lastly, I play Shield Charge, Faster Attacks, and Momentum. It's a build that, again, that has low cast speed and low attack speed because I'm not like onslaught scaling or anything like that. So I think having all these extra links really looks for this. And with the final socket that I do have open, I think in my gloves, it could go for something like Plague Bearer. I was also aura swapping Haste with Flesh and Stone and Herald of Agony, but that's sort of the gem setup. Fairly straightforward to do. There's a little bit of flexibility and a couple things you can do. But yeah, that's sort of the build. A lot of interactions kind of coming together to make a build that barely functions, but I mean, it's still able to do all the content in the game without too much issue. And it's got fairly decent numbers. With my guard skill enabled, you can see that, you know, it's pretty high. I'd be guessing, especially with the guard skill up and Petrified Blood on, I could probably tank Uber Shaper Slam, but I'm too lazy to check the config right now. But yeah, that's the build. I want to give this a shot. Good luck. Really hard to put together again. Really, really expensive. And honestly, I think you would get more mileage out of playing Vaal Lightning Strike with the Hate Forge setup. But I do think this thing is really cool, pretty defensive, and just like a solid all-rounder that I was really happy to play and probably will play for at least a couple more days.